respond on that.
Yeah. Or you can ask everybody to mute.
Oh.
You have to mute too.
That's fine. This is not important. Okay. So we're discussing the meaning of Rebbe Rashav's words when he says that the 9th of Kislev is the perfect fulfillment of God's intent in creation. And one of the meaning of the words, the perfect fulfillment of God's intent, there's the intent, there's the perfect intent, there's the true intent. What do those words mean? To explain this, we began discussing different levels of serving God, different elements of serving God. We began with action. Then we said the higher level of serving God is with prayer. We discussed yesterday there's 2 elements in prayer. There's prayer both draws things in this world to a higher place, and prayer also draws down blessing from heaven to this world. It does both. And today we're going to continue page 593 and see how prayer, although prayer seems to be such an amazing thing, it connects this world to the higher world, etc., it's not the ultimate perfection. Prayer, although it includes both elements of ascending and descending, it both elevates the things of this world to godliness and also draws a godly light to this world. It's still not the perfection of serving God. Why? Because davening is done in a way of a war. Maamar Rashi explains you're supposed to begin davening with a sense of subjugation and lowliness. You're supposed to feel humble before Hashem before you begin to pray. That's how Rashi interprets the words of our sages. You should only begin to pray with koyed reish. Koyed reish, Rashi says, means feeling of submission. In the language of the Ramah, who in the Code of Jewish Law says, before you pray, not only should you think about the greatness of God, you should also think about the lowliness of man. In other words, you're addressing the friction that there is in serving God. Davening doesn't leave the place of the battlefield. In the place of davening, there is also the 2 sides. There's also your opponent. And therefore, before you begin to daven, you address the lowliness of man as well, because you're not escaping that arena. There's war, there's friction there. And not only is there a war, but the war is on every single thing in this world. His father passed away before his bris. That's why he's named after his father. He was Mendel. He was raised, I think, by Zayda, Chaim Futafas. And he used to say that his Zayda, when he would, before going to sleep, if I remember correctly, it was his Zayda. Maybe it was someone else, I don't remember. He would, before going to sleep, he would say Shema, and he would cry. And the person who was crying was someone who all day was helping people, doing mitzvahs and learning. Yet every night he would cry. So he asked him, why are you crying? Why are you crying? So he said, because it smells. In other words, although he does lots of great things, he's not doing it really altruistically. He's doing it for something else involved. It's not. There's the word world in Hebrew means concealment. Maybe he's doing lots of great things, but he's crying for himself, for his neshama, for his soul. He feels like he's doing all these things, and his neshama is been captured by himself, by his animal soul, and he's doing all these wonderful things, but for very wrong reasons. Mendel Futafas himself, they were Rabbi Shabtai Savatitsky, another yeshiva student who once attending to him. He was an elderly man, and they were staying at the same place he was, and there was never a moment when it was time to go to sleep. It was, instead of time to go to sleep, it was time to say Shema. When you say Shema, you wouldn't stop. Some people, that's what they did at night. They wouldn't sleep, they would say Shema. That's what you do, you say Shema.
How? How do you say Shema?
So
Over
listen,
and over?
So listen. So So in the middle of the night, he's sleeping, hears someone crying, he can't imagine. And he goes over to Mendel's room, and the door is slightly ajar, he hears Mendel's crying. And where is he up to? He's up to the very first words of the Shema, where we say, Master of the universe, I forgive. And he's saying, I forgive, and he's crying, I forgive, he's crying, and he can't figure out. Why is he crying by the words, I forgive? What is he crying about? So he didn't understand. And he didn't want to ask about the leader. He didn't want to interrupt him, of course, but he didn't want to ask him. Until a while later, months later, there was a Februarian, and he had the temerity to say to the Mendel, what's the connection between tears and I forgive? So Mendel said, what? And he said, oh, looking at darkness, looking you're not supposed to look. And Mendel said, the whole idea of I forgive means that I am an I, and I am an ego. And therefore, when you step on my toes, it annoys me, it bothers me, and how dare you do that? That whole thing is a product of the oil of Lashon Master. That's because of the concealment of godliness. The whole idea that I have to forgive you when I'm in that status where you bother me and I have to forgive you, there's a problem myself that I'm in that status. On other occasions, Mendel used to say, it would continue on in that prayer, and we would say, I forgive anyone who was wronged me in all kinds of ways, whether it was in this incarnation or in the previous incarnation. Mendel Futerfas used to say, how could it be a chassid saying all these things? A chassid is so annoyed by all these things, how could it be? So he said, because we say in both incarnations, maybe in the previous incarnation I was mistaken. Of course, he didn't mean, it doesn't matter, as previous Rebbe said, there's some people who are a chassid and nusach only. They're a chassid because they use the siddur. The idea of a mistagid is within each of us, the part of us that resists the godly soul, which is attracted and affected by the concealment of godliness. So there's not just a war about whether I did the right thing or not. There's a war about everything. There's a war about everything because the world conceals godliness. So before davening, we don't leave that place of concealment, and we deal with that issue. We fight with that. Davening is the battlefield. And davening is meant to be a place where we wrestle with this concealment, and we resolve to battle against the concealment of godliness, and to make everything in this world, as the author writes in Tanya, chapter 43, I think, he writes in Tanya how everything in this world has something in common. It's enveloped by concealment of godliness. So in davening, you're meant to gather your strength to fight that. When we told elderly chassid visited a few years ago, what was his name? Rabbi Smith. I told him, you shouldn't be affected by the Yitzhak. You don't have to be scared of the Yitzhak. Every day you learn anew, every day you pray anew, you get fresh energy. And automatically you don't have to be affected by the Yitzhak. Don't be scared of the Yitzhak. So, but there is a war. There's a fight. You get fresh energy. You get fresh energy when you're done. So there's a fight on everything in the world that the fight is, do you listen to the concealment, the lie of the world, or do you make it into something holy? Do you realize what it's for? That's one area of the war. There's also a war with your own animal soul. Until you win the war, not only do you do the right thing, but a higher level of serving God is where you make peace between the two parts of yourself, the godly soul and the animal soul. So that the animal soul too is also interested in Torah and mitzvahs and spirituality. The animal soul isn't bad; it's just selfish. So the ultimate goal is not to just to repress it, but it's to transform it so that it also appreciates the Eibush, it also appreciates Hashem, it also loves Hashem. That's what we mean. We say in davening, love God with all your hearts, godly soul and the animals. But so davening is a perfection because davening, although there's a purpose, we need to have that. We need to daven. But davening is in a place of darkness. Not like the first thing we spoke about action. Where action is clearly in the place of the world, in the place of concealment. But davening is also a place of war. Where is there the perfection of serving God? Where is the highest level of serving God? That's in Torah study. Why? In Torah study, the impact on the world is done in a peaceful way, in a tranquil way. In the words of the Alter Rebbe when he was released, God redeemed my soul in peace. Why? How does the Torah bring us to peace? The way the Torah affects the things of this world is not by fighting with them, it's not by engaging with them, rather it's automatic. Torah impacts the world automatically. It's similar to the words of Hashem we recite in our prayers. He commanded and it was created. It wasn't that Hashem had to engage with the creation and stop what he was doing. And God isn't affected by creation. Creation is something he commanded, it's there. Similarly, when we learn Torah, there's a change. There's a change in the world. There's a change not by engaging with it, like when we do action. And even now, like in prayer, we're trying to change ourselves and trying to shift our perspective. In Torah study, you're learning Torah and you're bringing God's light to the world. That is a God limited Torah. So just like when God created the world, it was just he commanded, and the world came to be. So too, when you study Torah, when a person sits down and is involved in Torah study, when he reads the halacha, where it says it's kosher, it's permissible, it's pure, he impacts the world and causes the thing he's learning about to be kosher, to be pure, to be permissible. Just like this is in a simple sense, it says the Torah is the master of creation. The Gemara Yerushalmi discusses a scenario where a girl is 3 years old and there is a certain change in the body at the age of 3, and because of that change in the body, there's laws that pertain to her virginity, whether she can be considered a virgin after the age of 3 or not. And the question is, what if her birthday is in Adar, and the Jewish court adds another month, and now her birthday is a month later, and they added the month of Adar after her birthday?
It works.
The Torah changed. Not only does it retroactive,
It's not retroactive.
Her change in her body. I'm sorry. The change in her body at the age of 3 reverts when you add the month. She becomes now physically less. Like Dr. Bressman has a scale in his office, which can tell you how many years you have left in the world. I don't really believe it, but
Or how many years?
how years you're old, how old you are. It's how old you are.
Yeah, your
Biological age.
It's different from chronological.
So, which is different chronological, how your biological age. That's a scale. It always tells you everything that you don't want to know. This Gemara says that she's 3 years old, and suddenly the Torah says she's 2 years and 11 months all of a sudden, and now she is now, her body changes again. Her body changes. The Torah changes the existence of the world. And that was what I mean, 4 lines in the bottom. So to regarding what we're talking about, by the Torah ruling that something is kosher, something is permissible, something is allowed, you remove that object from a state of being being nourished by the 3 impure clippers. There are, very interesting, there are different kinds of sacrifices that we bring for different kinds of sin. There's a sacrifice that's brought for a sin that's done on purpose. A sacrifice is done for a sin that's done by accident. Actually, sins done on purpose usually you don't have sacrifices for. Usually there are other punishments, except for a few. And then there is a sacrifice you bring when you don't know if you did an Avera or not. Elsewhere, the Rabbi writes that the evil that produces an Avera by accident is more subtle than the evil that produces an Avera on purpose. Why am I doing an Avera on purpose? Because I feel I want to do this. I don't care what the right thing is. That's why I do the Avera on purpose. I'm insensitive to my neshama. Why do I do an Avera by accident? Because within myself, there is the animal soul is doesn't matter if it's my fault or not. It's total accident. It says in the package it's OU and it's not OU. You know what I'm saying? So okay. So the fact that I do an aver by accident, in a way, it's worse because that shows there's some kind of subtle evil inside myself. My animal soul is stronger in some way, and that's why even without thinking about it, I do an aver. Then the Rabbi says further, an aver they don't know about. The Gemara says that that the price of the sacrifice that is brought for a sin you're not sure you did costs more. Why does it cost more? The simple reason it costs more is because people don't regret things that they did. They're not sure they did anything wrong in the first place. If I know I did a mistake, so I regret it. But if I'm not even sure I made a mistake, it's hard for me to do tshuva for that because who says it was a mistake? But on the other hand, if there's a subconscious evil in an inadvertent sin, there's even deeper subconscious evil in a sin that you don't even know you did, if you did, but you can't know you did it. But the very fact you're in that state indicates something deeper. There's more of a deeper subconscious issue. So when you learn Torah, and there are some items the Torah says that it's a question. It's a question if it's an issue. There's something the Torah says which are absolutely not kosher. So when you learn Torah and you learn that something is kosher, something is permissible, something is pure, you lift the object out of being in a state of definite evil, or probable, or might be evil, and you change it. It says in Tanya, the word asur means tied up. The word asur, forbidden, comes to the word tied up. So when you learn Torah, what are you doing? The Torah releases it from this attachment. That's in Tanya. What does non-kosher mean? Non-kosher means attached. No matter how great your intent is to use this object for a holy purpose, it cannot be elevated. It remains unholy. It remains attached to the unholy. But when you learn Torah, but Torah transforms things in this world and releases them from being nourished from the impure klipa, and puts them in the status of receiving an energy from the klipa, a concealed godliness, albeit a concealed godliness, but something which is kosher, until the Torah transfers objects from being in a state of the unholy to becoming something that's able to receive its energy from holiness. Now, obviously, there's a lot that Rebbe is not saying here. You learn Torah about some things that the Gemara says are forbidden, and the Gemara says it's impure. The Gemara says and the things that were impure and unholy are impure and unholy without you learning them. And things which are kosher and pure are also kosher and pure without you learning them as well. But there's something that's changing in the world by you studying Torah. The Torah is impacting things in the world and it's moving things around. There's things that Torah is dictating. The Torah is elevating the world when you study. It seems that there's a lot here that we need other discourses to know exactly the full picture of what I was describing over here. But suffice it to say, the Torah impacts the world without you touching it. How are you going there? Give me one example. I have spoken on another occasion about people who are trapped in a place that you're not allowed to visit. There are certain places halachically you're not allowed to walk into. You're allowed to walk into a monastery. You're allowed to walk into there's some places that you're not allowed to walk into.
Like church or chapel.
Right. So Rabbi spoke about how when you're studying Torah where you are, you're able to help people in those places. Your Torah has a ripple effect, and it's impacting people there. Or Rabbi spoke, it was 19th Kislev actually. Rabbi spoke about how there are Jews in Russia who are unable to perform certain mitzvahs. And they get strength from Jews outside of Israel, outside of Russia, performing the Torah mitzvahs in countries that they're allowed to, where they are given permission to keep Torah. In other words, we're all connected to each other. And the Torah and the mitzvahs done in one place, we're all one body. So one person's performing mitzvahs in one place, there's an impact in someone else. The freedom Rebbe spoke, it's a very interesting discourse, Rabbi. Rebbe spoke about different kinds of imprisonment. There's imprisonment of the Soviet government, and there's imprisonment of the Sahara. And I have certain things that I'm good at, certain things I'm not good at. And Rebbe spoke about the connection between the things you're free in, the things you're not free, and how one mitzvah leads to another, and how one person being free from the areas of challenge that are challenged for another person, how me being free for those areas that you're challenged by, I give you strength. If you have an issue, let's say eating kosher, and I eat kosher. So my keeping kosher is just for me, it also helps you. My having a lulav and esrog in New York or Los Angeles, and you're in Moscow, you can't get a lulav and esrog. Somehow that blesses you and that frees you, and that will allow you one day to have lulav and esrog. So there's that's in our mitzvahs. Here they were speaking about Torah. Torah is higher than mitzvahs. Torah changes the world. This difference between Torah and prayer, that prayer is where we engage with the world, and we're enveloped, and we're concentrated on the world, and the Torah study, which Torah impacts the world automatically. This is also noticeable in the kind of impact that Torah and prayer have in the world. There's a difference between Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Chayei HaMagil. Chayei HaMagil and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai both brought rain to the world when there was a drought. But there's a difference in how they brought rain to the world. Chayei HaMagil, what do? He made a circle. He said to God, I'm not walking out of the circle until it rains. And then it rained. So he prayed to God. So after he prayed to God, it started to rain. But it rained in a way that there was only a few drops. There's Hashem. That wasn't what I asked for. Then all of a sudden there's a flood of rain. Hashem is not what I asked for. And he had to calibrate the divine flow so it should fit with the world. Right? He prayed, God answered him, but it had to be a set to fit the world. So the Gemara tells us a story. It's a lesson for us that although prayer has an impact on heaven and causes things to happen in this world, but and he was victorious and God listened to him, but there still was a special effort that was needed to adjust the divine flow with the world, to make the world ready to receive God's blessing. The world should be a vessel for God's goodness. Why is that? Why was it necessary? Because davening is a way of service of Hashem, of war, of fighting, and therefore there is a need for adjustment. There's a need to fix. There's a need to adjust. However, Shimon Yochai also the world needed rain in his time too. They came to Shimon Yochai, and what does Shimon Yochai do when needed rain? He just taught Torah and the words. It is pleasant and it is good when brothers sit together. That's all he said. He didn't say God sent rain. It's pleasant and it's good when brothers sit together, and all of a sudden it started to rain. So why was he able to do that? Because he wasn't bringing down the rain through prayer. He was bringing it down through Torah, and it came out automatically in a way that was appropriate, the way the world needed it. Because Torah isn't in a zone where there is conflict, but there's concealment. Torah is in a place of light and revelation, and therefore Torah just dictates what has to happen here. The Zohar says that the Maamar and Chassidus of Rabbi explain the relationship between the specific teaching he said and rain. He spoke about brothers sitting together, about Ahavas Yisrael, which is spiritual counterpart of Ahavas Yisrael. The origin of Ahavas Yisrael is the connection of all souls to Hashem. That's where Ahavas Yisrael begins. That's where love begins. The unity of Zah and Nukva. So when he spoke about this unity in heaven and on the earth, so the rain came down in a peaceful way, in a perfect way, in a way that we could accept it. Okay, we'll stop here, but in short, what we learned today is that there is an element of serving God with prayer, and that has its challenges, that has its difficulties. It's about the fight, it's about the war. There's a higher way of serving God, and that is serving God with Torah study. Torah study has an effect on the world in an automatic way, without engaging with the world. And that's the reason why Shimon Yochai and the Rabbi were different in the way the rain came down, the way they brought the rain down. Shimon Yochai didn't ask for the rain. Chayei HaMagil prayed for the rain. Another difference is the kind of rain that came down. Plain I got just the rain, and the Shemay Choy did not have to, because that's Torah study. The way Torah study affects the world is in a automatic way, without any war, without any challenge. All right.
So that means because on the higher level there is no war. And
At the higher level, right? It's above the world. Exactly. Above the world. Exactly what it's not true.
Look, you should. So the line, it's good. It's good.
It's good and sweet when brothers sit together.
And sweet when brothers.
Yeah.
Where is that?
It's